And I want us all to understand that Donald Trump is not the only child predator who is being protected by Mike Johnson, who is being protected by Kristi Noem, who is being protected by every one of our Republican colleagues who refuses to do their goddamn job right now. Is there any exemption that ICE is not obligated to provide people with their constitutional protections that other law enforcement agents have?
Absolutely.
When Casten says Donald Trump is being protected by Republican leadership, he's not simply name-calling. He's drawing attention to the broader network of political shielding that has too often insulated powerful figures from consequences, whether it's around the Epstein files, abuse of power, or violations of basic civil and human rights.
Ryder, you closed your opening remarks referencing the Epstein files. I want to share a story. I was talking with a teacher in Berwyn, and she said one of the parents of one of the students in her class said, "I am less concerned about whether a masked, unidentified ICE officer seizes my child than I am with whether a child trafficker dressed as a masked, ununiformed ICE officer seizes my child." And I want us all to understand that Donald Trump is not the only child predator who is being protected by Mike Johnson, who is being protected by Kristi Noem, who is being protected by every one of our Republican colleagues who refuses to do their goddamn job right now. And we got to call that out in the same way Jasmine Crockett just did. I can get real emotional here, but I'm going to try to stay within the bounds of the law, at least for a little while. Mr. Fee, Fifth Amendment says that every American, not every American, everybody within our borders has a right to due process. 14th Amendment says that everybody has afforded equal protection under the law. The Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, no unlawful search and seizure. You can't be detained, cruel and unusual punishment. At what point in ICE's current process are they affording detainees with those rights?
It's difficult to identify any point in the process where they're following any of their detainees' rights consistently.
So is there a timing? When do they provide somebody with information? What's the legal basis for your detention? When do they provide people with notification of your due process rights? Ever?
In the instances that I've been involved with, it's not happened.
Is there any, I mean, we all watch cop shows, right? We all know the Miranda warning. Is there any exemption that ICE is not obligated to provide people with their constitutional protections that other law enforcement agents have?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so let me shift now to Broadview. ICE right now has this online detainee locator system, which is not mandated by law, right? They're providing this that you can look and see if somebody is being detained. That database does not provide any information about anybody in these quote-unquote temporary holding facilities, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so nobody knows. People get picked up off the street, they get swept up, they get disappeared. They don't know what their rights are, and we don't know where they are. Is that legal under any reasonable reading of the Constitution?
Absolutely not, and these folks are denied access to counsel as a matter of policy, and they're constitutionally entitled to that, and they do not receive it.
Okay. Several of our witnesses, I think Pastor Black had mentioned this, I think I'm forgetting, but several of you had mentioned that if you're breaking the law, there are consequences that can be held. I know people had mentioned our governor should maybe step up, maybe our attorney general. My understanding is that a lot of the enforcement of law is typically done by district attorneys, state's attorneys. Can you give any sense of the process for state's attorneys and district attorneys who are watching today? What process would they need to go through to prosecute ICE officers who, as law enforcement officers, are expressly violating people's constitutional protections? And whether you want to talk about breaking and entering, whether you want to talk about unlawful search and seizure, whether you want to talk about murder, I mean, all of these things seem to be happening. What is the process? Do state's attorneys have the ability to use that right now? District attorneys, what would they have to do in order to begin bringing penalties against these individuals?
I'd have to defer to my colleagues in the state government, but certainly folks have the right to get civil remedies against violations of the Constitution by federal law enforcement, and people are moving in that direction and are seeking that redress in courts.
Okay, well, I hope we can give some thought about that. California several years ago did bring charges against an ICE officer. Now, he was off duty when they did it, but there is a precedent for state officials doing that. And, you know, those of us who are out here who are angry, we're responsible for writing the laws. We don't have law enforcement authority, and I think our law enforcement partners can help. Pastor Black, I'd like to give you the final word, and I see I'm running out of time here. Speaker Johnson famously said, if you want to know what I believe, just read the Bible. You want to preach for us of any particular passages from the Bible that he might want to be reminded of as he thinks about whether or not he should do his job?
Thank you, Mr. Casten. This is the same speaker who said that it is not a problem in his view that an American pastor, a Protestant pastor of a mainline denomination, was shot in the head by ICE officers. I am reminded that The God of my religion is one who became incarnate to be among us and to suffer the way that we suffer. And I believe that Jesus is alive and active in all that we are experiencing right now, and that he is with those who are being detained, that he is suffering as they suffer. When I think, Mr. Casten, that you describe it very well when you describe this Operation Midway Blitz as a human trafficking operation, which is being federally sanctioned. We need help. When the federal government is attacking American citizens, who will protect us? The front line should not just be the brave mothers, Latina mothers, who are stepping up to organize our communities. We need every arm of our government to bring all their powers to bear to protect us, for those whose salaries we pay with our tax dollars, to protect us in real time every day.
Representative Sean Casten's heated moment in a congressional hearing is a window into the deeper moral and constitutional crisis unfolding in America's immigration system and political culture. Casten's remarks are blunt, emotional, and yes, incendiary, but they serve a clear purpose: to shake complacency, to force attention on what he sees as a collapse of both accountability and humanity. What he's highlighting is a moral double standard. The same political establishment that claims to stand for law and order is, in his view, turning a blind eye to state-sanctioned lawlessness. By invoking the story of a teacher who fears that a child trafficker dressed as an ICE officer might seize her child, Casten forces listeners to confront the scale of fear that government actions have inspired in immigrant and mixed-status communities. That fear doesn't come from rumor, it comes from lived experience. People have been detained without warrants, without due process, sometimes without even being recorded in databases that families could access to locate them. Parents are disappearing from homes, leaving children behind, not because of a court order, but because of chaotic enforcement and a system that too often operates in secrecy. This is where Casten's legal framing becomes vital. He walks through the Constitution, the 4th, 5th, 8th, and 14th Amendments, not as an academic exercise, but as a reminder that these rights belong to everyone on U.S. soil. Due process and equal protection are not optional or reserved for citizens. They are foundational to our democracy. And when a federal agency detains people without telling them why, denies them access to lawyers, or hides their whereabouts from families and the public, it's not just cruel, it's unconstitutional. Casten presses a critical point that rarely gets mainstream attention. If ICE officers are violating constitutional rights, what mechanisms exist to hold them accountable? Can state and local prosecutors bring charges when federal officers act illegally? The answer, as discussed in the hearing, is murky, but it shouldn't be. The law provides for civil remedies, yet those are slow, costly, and inaccessible to the most vulnerable. Meanwhile, the lack of oversight and the culture of impunity allow abuses to multiply in the shadows. This is the heart of Casten's frustration, and it's why his rhetoric is raw. He's not trying to score partisan points, he's trying to drag the conversation back to first principles. The Constitution is supposed to be a shield for everyone, not a weapon used selectively by those in power. When leadership looks away, when law and order becomes a slogan instead of a standard, government stops being a system of laws and becomes a hierarchy of privilege. Pastor Black's closing words reinforce that this isn't just political, it's deeply moral. His reminder that Jesus is suffering as they suffer reframes the entire issue in human and spiritual terms. Faith, he implies, demands solidarity with the oppressed, not silence in the face of cruelty. When a nation allows state violence against the vulnerable, it betrays not only its constitution, but its conscience. The takeaway here isn't just outrage, it's responsibility. Viewers must see that this conversation is about power, oversight, and the kind of country we choose to be. Immigration enforcement, when detached from justice, becomes indistinguishable from the very human trafficking it claims to fight. The call to action is simple but urgent: demand transparency. Demand that constitutional rights be honored universally. Support leaders who defend the rule of law for everyone, not just the powerful. Because when officials can disappear people without consequence, when due process is treated as optional, the problem is no longer about one agency or one administration. It's about whether America still believes in its own founding promises. True democracy isn't maintained by slogans, it's maintained by citizens who refuse to accept cruelty as normal. Representative Casten's anger is a reflection of what happens when compassion and law diverge, and his warning is clear. If we fail to act, if we tolerate this erosion of rights, we will wake up one day in a nation that has confused power for justice.